Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Olivia Cairns and I am joined tonight by the former MSP for East Kilbride, Linda Fabiani. How are you, Linda?
Hi. Oh, very well, thank you, Olivia.
So today we start with the Ukraine update, day 1063. After his inauguration on Monday, Donald Trump said that Vladimir Putin is destroying Russia by not making a deal to end the war in Ukraine. He should make a deal. I think Russia is going to be in big trouble, said Trump, claiming he was preparing to meet Putin. The Russian president greeted Trump's inauguration by sending his congratulations and saying he was open to dialogue with the new US administration on the Ukraine war. I want to emphasise that its goal should not be a brief truce, but a lasting peace based on the respect for all legitimate interests of all people, Putin said. French President Macron warned that Russia's war against Ukraine would not end today, tomorrow, or the day after, as Donald Trump, who pledged to quickly wind up the conflict, returned to the White House. Trump promised over the summer to end Russia's war against Ukraine in 24 hours, although he did not explain how he planned to do that. Let us not delude ourselves, Macron said in his New Year's address to the French armed forces. This conflict will not end tomorrow or the day after. Macron also called for Europe to wake up and spend more on defence in order to reduce its reliance on the US. President Zelensky has hailed the opportunity to achieve a just peace in Ukraine, as congratulated Trump on his inauguration. As US President, Zelensky said that he was looking forward to achieve an active and mutually beneficial cooperation with Trump's administration. One of two North Korean soldiers captured by Ukraine in Russia's Kursk region have apparently told interrogators that Pyongyang's troops fighting for Moscow are suffering serious losses, according to official video published by Ukraine on Monday. The soldier said he was conscripted, aged 17, and has been serving since then. He repeated a claim from previous video that he had not known he was being sent to Russia to fight. Ukraine's State of Investigation Bureau, the DBR, said that it was detained two generals and a colonel suspected of negligence in failing to adequately defend against Russia's offensive in the Kharkiv region in 2024. The Russian-backed leader of Transnistria said unofficial government was ready to buy gas from Moldova, the legitimate government, more than 2 weeks after Russian suppliers halted when Ukraine refused to continue letting Moscow's gas go through its territory. Russia recorded a budget of deficit of more than three troubles for the third year running in 2024. The Finance Ministry said on Monday, with both spending and a revenue rising sharply as Moscow plough through economic resources into the war in Ukraine. Linda, how do you think Trump's inauguration into office will affect the war?
Well, it's certainly not going to finish it in 24 hours, we know that for sure. I think it's all very interesting, all the players involved here. I mean, the way that President Zelensky has welcomed Trump, it's completely understandable in diplomacy terms. Putin, I never take anything that Vladimir Putin says at face value. And one of the things, you actually quoted it there, Olivia, was that he was looking for a lasting peace. That sounds good. That's, I think, what everyone wants. But he did say that you have to protect, and the quote was, the legitimate interests of all people. So, it strikes me that what Vladimir Putin feels to be legitimate interests of any group of people, may be very different from what President Zelensky would think of as legitimate interests, what perhaps the international community would think of as legitimate interests, and indeed what the people themselves might consider to be the legitimate interests. So I think there's a lot in that phrase that requires unpicking as time goes on. Having said that, I very much hope, as of course we all do, that there will be discussions that will lead to peace. and stopping the killing, stopping the heartache and the damage that has been done everywhere. As far as the other interesting thing, I think, of the North Korean soldiers, these seems to me that a lot of them, they're just dupes in a wider game that their own leader and Vladimir Putin are playing, and one can't help but have a bit of sympathy for them.
Perfect, thank you. Moving on to the Middle East update. At least 47,107 Palestinians have been killed and 111,147 injured in Gaza Strip since October 7, 2023, despite the ceasefire, according to the Gaza Health Authority. As the Gaza ceasefire comes into force, Israeli military raids West Bank city of Jenin have killed at least 8 Palestinians. Israeli soldiers stormed the city from the Jalami military checkpoint. According to Palestinian news agency Wafa, after a special Israeli force infiltrated the Al-Jabari neighbourhood, Jenin refugee camp is one of 19 across the West Bank built in the aftermath of the founding of the Israeli state in 1948 to house displaced Palestinians. The IDF Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Herzl Halevi, has informed Defence Minister Israeli Katz that he will resign on the 6th of March, saying in a statement that he is leaving the military after recognising my responsibility for the failure of the IDF on 7th October. Israeli opposition leader Yair Lapid has called Netanyahu and his government to resign after Military Chief Lieutenant Herzl quit over October 7th Hamas attacks. Speaking at the World Economic Forum, Qatar's Prime Minister has said he hopes the Palestinian Authority would return to play a governing role in Gaza once the war with Israel comes to an end. Donald Trump has reversed the Biden administration's sanctions on violent Israeli settlers in a concession to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Hamas have confirmed 4 female Israeli hostages will be freed on Saturday in return for the release of Palestinian prisoners, the second exchange under the ceasefire deal. Displaced Palestinians continue to return to their homes in Gaza across a territory that lies in ruins. The search for bodies buried under the rubble has started, with Gaza's Civil Defence Agency saying its workers dug up 66 bodies in Gaza yesterday. Linda, do you think Trump's reversal of Biden's administration sanctions will help bring peace protests?
No. I was quite appalled by that. It took Joe Biden an awful long time to do anything remotely decisive like that on behalf of the Palestinians. So I'm really concerned that Trump has reversed that. I was reading some reports by Al Jazeera earlier today, and they're reporting ongoing atrocities in the West Bank. And that's something that very many of us have been keeping an eye on over the peace, because while the vast majority of the population in Gaza were being displaced and thousands killed and injured, there was a lot of stuff going on under the radar in the West Bank. More land grabs, burning Palestinians out of their homes, etc. And Al Jazeera were reporting today that is still carrying on. So that's a real concern. I'm concerned about a lot of things, an ongoing concern about a lot of the reporting you get on the BBC, for example. It always seems to me there's a very unfair reporting on what happens to Israelis and what happens to Palestinians. A real saving grace for them in that is the reporter out there, the journalist Jeremy Bowen, and I was quite fascinated. I've been fascinated as it's gone on about his reporting, but he was very strong in saying that the fact that foreign journalists are still not being allowed into Gaza is a real concern, because what is Israel trying to hide there and what's ongoing? And, again, the reporting of, and you quoted some of it there, Olivia, Palestinians returning to their homes. They've not got any homes to be returning to. So much of the infrastructure has been destroyed. So many homes have been demolished. So what we really need here is an ongoing humanitarian aid effort by the entire international community, and not just letting this pass and then Israel to carry on the way they were doing, the international community to carry on the way they were doing. There has to be some solution for Gaza here. Is the Palestinian Authority up to it in their own? I don't know. They've been weakened as well and have not always been hugely successful in what they've been doing. So there has to be a determined and committed effort from everyone to try and bring a lasting peace, the words we all use, but also a fair deal, or as fair as possible, for the Palestinians as we move into the future.
Thank you for that, Linda. Moving on to Donald Trump's executive orders, withdrawing from Paris Agreement and WHO, immigration, and pardoning January 6 criminals. On day one, starting at the rally after his inauguration, Donald Trump got down on signing a raft of executive orders into law. The executive orders included ending birthright citizenship. Along with a slew of immigration-focused orders, Trump is targeting automatic citizenship for US-born children of immigrants in the country illegally, to begin 30 days from today. Leaving the World Health Organization. Trump signed an order to have the US exit from the World Health Organization. The US will leave the WHO in 12 months' time and stop all financial contributions into its work. Renaming the Gulf of Mexico. Trump ordered 2 name changes, the Gulf of Mexico and Alaska's Mount Delaney. Revoking electric vehicle targets. Trump revoked a non-binding executive order signed by Biden aimed at marketing half of all new vehicles sold in 2030 electric. Trump has also promised to roll back auto pollution standards finalised by Biden's administration last spring. Reclassifying federal employees, making them easier to fire. Trump's executive order reclassified thousands of federal employees as political hires, making it much easier for them to be fired. Trump effectively resignates Schedule F, an executive order he signed in the last year of his first term, seeking to reclassify tens of thousands of federal workers, which Biden had rescinded. Declaring a national emergency energy. Trump declared a national energy emergency as part of a barrage of pro-fossil fuel actions and efforts in unleash already booming US energy productions, including rolling back restrictions on drilling in Alaska. Creating a policy recognising only 2 genders. Trump signed an order to remove gender ideology guidance from federal government communication policies and forms. Pausing the TikTok ban. Trump signed an executive order temporarily delaying the enforcement of a federal ban on TikTok for at least 75 days. Declaring a national border emergency. The order. Trump signed an order at the White House declaring an emergency at the southern US border along with several other immigration-related policies. Issuing pardons for over 1,500 January 6 defendants. Trump issued pardons for offenders and communications related to the January 6 attack on the Capitol. With Trump back in the White House, Justice Department investigations into January 6 crimes are expected to cease. Withdrawing from the Paris Climate Agreement. Trump issued an executive action withdrawing the US from the 2015 Paris Agreement, along with a letter informing the United Nations of the decision. Exiting the Paris Agreement is part of Trump's broader efforts to roll back climate protections and policy. Trump has described Biden's effort to grow the US clean energy sector as the Green New Scam. What do you make of this, Linda?
Apart from being very depressed by most of it, I just think the whole thing's horrifying. I mean, you could take each one of these many, many things that you mentioned, Olivia, and have real concerns about all of them for very different reasons. I mean, the biggie, of course, that came out first was the the pardons to over 1,500 people. There's a real, if you look at it, even aside from America, if you just look at that whole picture, you had people who refused to accept the result of a democratic election, who stormed the seat of democracy within their country, who issued threats and actually looked for people, it would seem, with a view to harming them, and injured police officers, and they're all being pardoned. That's a really, really bad message to be sending out in any democracy, that kind of behaviour is acceptable and doesn't get sanctions. It's almost dictatorship stuff, and I find that really, really concerning. I mean, the other things in terms of the world stage, the withdrawal from the World Health Organization. Okay, we're not long away from a global pandemic. It might not be
Do you
the
think
last
this
of
has
them.
possible implications for any future pandemics that might occur?
Well, I think it may have. I'm not a scientist, I wouldn't pretend to be. I'm not an expert in these things. But when one of the very main players in the world discredits an organisation like the World Health Organization by walking away from it, I think that is extremely concerning for anything that happens in the future. And then when you look at some of the people that he has given credence to and potentially bringing into his government, I think it becomes all the more worrying. It also has issues, I think, for US women in terms of reproductive health. And that's an ongoing problem, in particular states. And then, okay, the withdrawing from the Paris Protocol and the emphasis on drill, 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 hugely concerning. His unilateral declarations of, the disrespect being shown to any kind of diversity programs, the disrespect being shown to Native Alaskans over changing the name of the mountain back to McKinley from Denali, I think are concerning for ongoing. Of course, we don't know how many of these things are going to be all implemented immediately. We don't know how many are symbolic. We also don't know whether the impact of them can be limited by any kind of legal actions, because some legal actions have already been instituted about some of it. And I thought it was quite interesting when you looked at what he said about the imposition of taxes and tariffs. And he was really bullish about that during his campaign, and indeed through his term as president in waiting, particularly in relation to China, Canada and Mexico, when he talked about tariffs. And he's changed that because he was talking more or less that these were going to happen. Now he has asked the federal agencies to investigate the possibilities of what can happen there and the realities of it. So he has backtracked a bit from that. So that's very interesting. How much of it was rhetoric? How much of it is he going to try and put in? Then there's his promises. How long will it be before perhaps some of these will be seen as empty? This promise to bring down inflation very quickly, the promise to bring down costs, consumer costs for Americans. There's no detail in that. So how long before some of the guilt begins to be tarnished in these things? Panama Canal issue really, really concerns me. I notice he hasn't said much about Greenland that I've picked up again. But the Panama Canal, just saying we're going to take it. And some of the wording he used in his speech is worrying, because he said he was going to clarify the military role in protecting the integrity of the US and its citizens. So that's quite concerning too. What does that mean? I think it's just a case of wait and see. Once his government gets up and running, I think there's a potential for hugely concerning things for America or for North America and for the rest of us in the world. But I think there's also the potential for not as much happening as everybody thought might when reality hits in. So we shall see.
Trump has also been backed by very strong American citizens such as Elon Strangelove. We have a question here. Does Elon Strangelove have a problem with involuntary muscle spasms, or did he forget the cameras were there?
Well,
Elon
first of all, I
Musk.
don't watch him.
No.
First of all, I don't watch Elon Musk if I can help it, because he gives me the creeps. I always think of him as a sort of Lex Luthor, global horror that you find in films. I don't know. I saw the photographs of the salute, the arm movement that has caused outrage. I mean, the first thing that struck me, I have to say, is
Yeah.
when you have
Elon
when
Musk
you
found
have the
himself in the centre of criticism this week after he gave a fascist style salute to celebrate the presidential inauguration of Donald Trump.
yeah.
After addressing the audience, Musk slapped his right hand into his chest, fingers splayed, before shooting out his right arm on an upwards diagonal fingers together and palm facing down action. The Anti-Defamation League, which campaigns against anti-Semitism, defines Nazi salute as raising an outstretched right arm with the palm down. As the crowd roared, Musk turned and saluted again. Meanwhile, Vivek Ramaswamy has stepped down from Donald Trump's government cost-cutting task force, the ill-defined new Department of Government Efficiency (DOGE) programme, leaving Elon Musk in sole charge. Ramaswamy's exit comes as he reportedly plans to run for Ohio governor. Trump chose Ramaswamy to lead DOGE, a non-governmental organisation, along Musk in November. Politico reported that the situation was apparently sparked after Ramaswamy and Musk clashed over the tech industry's ability to hire foreign-born workers. Musk's relationship with his leadership has raised ethical concerns. His SpaceX company has huge defence contracts with the US government, while Tesla, Musk's electric car company, could also benefit from Trump's decisions in office. Doge is also the name of Musk's cryptocurrency. Doge was sued within minutes of Trump being inaugurated, with a lawsuit alleging it violates federal transparency rules on disclosure, hiring and other practices. The public interest law firm National Security Counselors said Doge meets the bar to be considered Federal Advisory Committee, a class of legal entity regulated to ensure the government receives transparent and balanced advice but fails to have a fairly balanced representation, keep records of its meetings, and be open with public scrutiny as required by the law. What do you make of this, Linda? How should public figures be held accountable, such as Musk, for potentially harmful symbolism?
Oh, well, I didn't see the actual video of this, Olivia. And as you described it there, it sounds horrifying. All I saw was a photograph, and my thought was, if you have a photographer taking 200 photos, you can get any still you want. Many of us who've been in public life have been at the end of that kind of photographic practice. So I didn't see the whole thing. I worry about Elon Musk. I mean, I have to say, because I do think he has this ego that is huge. And as I mentioned earlier, it's almost like the whole world domination thing that he seems to be about. I also suspect that he does things and spur of the moment, doesn't think through. I don't want to sound like I'm defending him on this, but I didn't see it. I have only heard the reports. But I think the whole Doge thing is really interesting, because public figures should certainly be held to account, no matter who the public figures are, and he's very much a public figure, should be held to account on their actions and on what
Do
they
you think
do.
this may have an
But
effect on Doge?
Well, I don't know. I mean, the other thing that's interesting, I was saying earlier about Trump sort of pulling back on some of the stuff that he said, and he's pulled back a bit on Dodge because since that lawsuit was mooted, he's now saying that Dodge is to be a unit within the executive branch rather than a standalone facility. So if it's a unit within the executive branch, that's a wee bit different from what the lawsuit was looking at. So it'll be interesting to see how that moves. It's also to be a temporary thing. I can't remember the end date for it, but it's been set up as a temporary thing. Can Musk do it? Can he make a difference there? I'm not sure. I think it's interesting that Ramaswamy has walked on that one because he could still have been doing it even whilst wanting to stand for governor, I would imagine, under the leadership of somebody like Trump, because people seem to be able to do anything they like. So it sounds a bit like a convenient excuse to walk away. So it makes me wonder if there's been a bit of aggro going on there, perhaps between Musk and Ramaswamy. And that leads me on to wonder how long Trump and Musk can actually be big buddies, because you have two massive egos there, two what I believe to be extreme narcissists. How long until one of them does something the other doesn't like or doesn't agree with, and that becomes a bit of strife. So if it wasn't such an important issue, it would be worth watching. We shall see.
Perfect, thank you. Moving on to Scottish news. The Scottish Government have held a debate on WASPy women in Scottish Parliament. The NSP has called on Sir Keir Starmer to urgently reverse his government decision not to provide compensation for women against state pension inequality, after the Scottish Parliament united in calling for the UK Government to deliver justice and compensation for the women affected by changes in state pension age. Scottish Labour MSPs joined members from all over parties in backing Scottish Government Social Justice Secretary Shirley Ann Somerville's call for the UK Government to deliver compensation as recommended by the Parliamentary Health Service Ombudsman. The UK Labour Government announced the week before Christmas that it would not follow the recommendations of the PHSO, which concluded that the Department for Work and Pensions should apologise and pay compensation to the estimated 335,910 women in Scotland and the 3.8 million women across the UK impacted by changes to the state pension age. Responding to the Scottish Parliament's unanimous support for the WASPy women, SNP MSP Claire Hawkey said, "After nearly a decade of campaigning for justice and 5 years waiting for the PHSO report, WASPy women rightly feel betrayed by the UK Labour Government and by politicians who once claimed to stand by them in their fight for justice. The Labour Government's refusal to abide by the findings of the PHSO report is a shameful abandonment of the women they once stood shoulder to shoulder with. The Scottish Parliament has made it clear today that Keir Starmer must urgently reverse this scandalous decision and pay the compensation to the women that deserve it." Linda, what more can the UK Government do to pressure Westminster into delivering compensation to the women?
Well, the Scottish Government actually can't pressure Westminster into doing anything. That's just the sad reality of a devolution settlement, and why folk like me would always push for independence and the ability to make our own decisions in these regards. But
Is there
today was really
anything the
interesting.
UK Government could do?
Well, it's in the hands of the UK Government. The UK Government can reverse a decision tomorrow if they so chose. They could look at the way all their MPs in the run up to the election and long before it stood side by side with the WASPy women and said, "We back you all the way," including Keir Starmer and all those in his government. And they completely and utterly backtracked. Now that was hugely embarrassing for so-called Scottish Labour, because they, along with folk like me when I was elected, met with the WASPy women, recognised the case and stood as Claire Hawkey quite rightly said, shoulder to shoulder with them. And I'm a waspy woman myself, actually, I have to say. And I never ever got any notice that it was changing. I think I probably picked it up in the press or something. Or because I was in the fortunate position of being in the Scottish Parliament, we picked up on these things. Of course we did. So I think today's debate is really important. And can Anas Sarwar and his team in Scotland put pressure on the UK government? I hope they continue to. Certainly, some of the things that were said today were really interesting. Katie Clark stood there and said we have to push Westminster. So carry on pushing, Katie Clark. Carol, I wrote it down, Carol Mohan was scathing and saying that an apology from Keir Starmer and the UK government was not enough. And Monica Lennon, who generally speaks her mind, reminded everyone in Parliament that the UK government isn't powerless to act and can meet the terms of what the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman came up with. Now, what I think was really interesting, that there was no MSP in the Labour group at all who spoke up in favour of or to support the UK government. Now, the Tories I completely discount because they're just opportunists and jumping everything. But I do think the Labour group in the Scottish Parliament are probably quite sincere in this because they feel really let down too. They feel they're absolute idiots because there they were campaigning away, being told by their bosses in London during the election campaign that we'll sort this out away and get good photos for your election leaflets, which they did. And now they've been told we've changed our minds. So that's where the pressure has to come from. What I think will be really interesting is what the Scottish MPs in Westminster now do. There was somebody in the MSP group, I can't remember who, said that Scottish MPs were backing them and would vote against the UK government if it went to a Westminster vote. So that's really interesting too. And I have to say, it's not just in Scotland that representatives of the Labour Party are kicking up stink about this. There's places in England it's happening too, and no doubt in Wales. So that's where all the pressure has to come from. When I think of Keir Starmer giving full support to the waspy women and then saying, no, change their minds, it's just appalling. Just one of the many things that the UK Labour government have changed their mind on, backtracked on.
Fabulous, thank you. Moving on, UK economic conditions weak at the start of 2025. UK pay growth rose in November despite evidence from employers cutting jobs after Rachel Reeves' tax-raising budget, underlining a dilemma for the Bank of England as it considers cutting interest rates within the next month. With the government under pressure on the economy, the Office for National Statistics said annual growth and average weekly earnings rose by 5.6% in the 3 months to the end of November, up from 5.2% in the 3 months to October. At the same time, the figures showed the UK unemployment rate for people aged 16 and over rose to 4.4% in the 3 months to November, up from 4.3% in the 3 months to October, highlighting some evidence of a cooling jobs market since the autumn budget. In Scotland, however, the figures from the ONS show that Scotland's unemployment rate fell by 0.2% to a total of 3.8% between September and November 2024. Scotland's growth in employment drastically outspaced the UK's in the same period, with the number of people employed in Scotland growing by 1%, while the UK shrank by 0.1%. The Scottish Government say they have prioritised building Scottish enterprise through initiatives like Small Business Bonus Scheme, which enables small and medium-sized businesses to provide employment opportunities across Scotland. Faster GDP growth rate and the productivity increasing at twice the UK rate shows Scotland's economy outperforming the UK. Commenting, NSP Michelle Thompson said, Scotland has all the strengths required to build prosperity, extraordinary natural resources, a skilled workforce, innovative companies and world-leading universities, combined with a faster GDP growth rate and productivity increasing at twice the UK rate. Scotland's economy is outperforming the UK. Linda, what do you think contributed to Scotland's growing economy success?
I would say it's hard work on behalf of the Scottish Government. This has been an ongoing thing. And when you consider, Olivia, that Scotland doesn't have the levers necessary to really give huge boosts to growth, employment rights and everything else, then when you look at the figures and how well we're doing, it's a success story. I only wish it could be better under independence, but it's still a success story when you look at how we're outperforming the UK in terms of all these figures that matter. And it is just by sheer hard work by the government, by its agencies, and some of the natural resources that Scotland has are hugely important. But as are all the little things that have been built up over the years. I think Michelle mentioned the small business bonus, or the report did by the ONS. That's made a big difference to small and medium-sized enterprises as well. And I looked at the Fraser of Allender's report about what was happening in that last quarter and for 2025. And I remember, I think it was last week or the week before, the UK Labour government were saying things were slightly better. The forecast was up a wee bit for 2025. But Fraser of Allender have said, yeah, that's because of government spending, but it's only a short-term boost. The budget means that inflation and interest rates are higher. And in the longer term, real incomes will be lower. So it's the workers who will actually bear the brunt of what's going on. And unfortunately, the Scottish Government does not have the ability, because of the devolution settlement, to take up an awful lot of these things in relation to employment. So they're doing particularly well when you look at the difference between Scotland and its performance in employment, in growth, compared to the UK figures. I only wish that we could do a lot more, and I only wish that the Scottish Labour Party would recognise how much more we could do with independence, instead of always saying we are better off sticking with Westminster. It's getting harder and harder for them to be able to show that in any way whatsoever. And I just wish they'd stop trying and come to terms with reality.
Moving on, hospitality firms expect to incur an extra $1 billion costs and increase in employer NICs. The industry body UK Hospitality has said the industry will incur an extra £1 billion of costs for 774,000 of its workers who will be newly eligible for the employer national insurance contributions from April, endangering jobs and businesses. A leading industry body has claimed UK Hospitality, which represents thousands of restaurants, hotels, pubs, cafes, nightclubs, is calling on the government to delay or alter changes to the tax announced in Rachel Reeves' October budget in accordance to protect jobs. It said hospitality businesses currently employed 1.2 million staff who are not eligible for employer national insurance contributions, but that number would be cut to 450,000 people, as more were dragged into a lower threshold from April. It said £1 billion is on top of £2.4 billion of other costs due to hit in April, including rising wage bills. Business leaders have already warned that measures in Labour's budget to increase employer NICs by £25 billion from April and a 6.7% increase rise in the national minimum wage will force companies to cut jobs, pause hiring, or pass on higher employment costs in the form of higher prices. Retailers including Tesco, Marks and Spencer's and Next wrote to Reeves in November to warn that £7 billion increase in annual costs after the budget would lead to job cuts and higher prices. Linda, what advice would you give to policymakers to balance government revenue needs with protecting jobs and businesses in this industry?
Well, I think I would have to look to others to help me with that advice. I wouldn't pretend to be an economist or to have that level of knowledge. But I think one has to listen to people who are in the know. And it was interesting that all the big employers that you mentioned, like Marks and Tesco and all of these, were all up in arms about it. But I think this particular report from UK Hospitality is really interesting because UK Hospitality covers a huge range of firms, large and small. And they've actually drilled down to the numbers and the costs that this is going to have. And it's a big concern. I mean, we've all seen over the last couple of years many of these places having to close down as a result of the pandemic, for example, and as a result of the cost of living increases. So this is likely to get worse. And I noticed that what they're saying is that they would like the government to initially delay this coming in, and also to look at staging the thresholds so that it doesn't have such an immense effect. Because when you look at the figures, 1.2 million staff, I think you said, who are currently not eligible for employers' national insurance, going down to 450,000. But there's another element there. You have to wonder why they're not eligible for national insurance contributions, and that's because they're not getting paid a huge amount. So there's a bigger picture there that the UK government should be considering as well in terms of fairness. And I get quite frustrated about this whole national insurance increase because of what I think is a bit of fancy footwork. The Labour UK government got in saying there'd be no tax rises. I remember Scottish Labour saying the same. But national insurance as a tax is ridiculous to pretend otherwise. It's not as if it gets ring-fenced for anything particular. There's still people that think that national insurance is about health service and everything else. It's not. It goes into the big pot of taxation. So it is a tax. It's just not called a tax. And the studies have shown that, Labour thought they were being really smart putting it on employers and that people would say, oh, it's not a tax rise, I'm doing okay. But this is going to directly affect so many people in so many ways. It's going to contribute to the ongoing cost of living and austerity. And it is a choice that the Labour government made that they would do this. They increased a tax. So I'm interested in UK Hospitality's call for a delay or perhaps a staging in how it goes forward. I haven't heard anything hopeful from the UK Labour government, and I just wonder what effect this is going to have when it comes in and starts. Be interesting to see. I hope it doesn't have a hugely negative effect in Scotland. There's no reason why it shouldn't. It'll have a negative effect everywhere. But, the Scottish Government is doing so well, as we covered in the last article, and this could really be a big body punch for that, and could change things without the Scottish Government having the right under the devolution settlement to do anything about that because they don't have the powers.
Thank you, Linda. That moves us on to day one of World Economic Forum in Davos. Speaking on the first day of the World Economic Forum in Davos, the President of European Commission's Ursula von der Leyen has called for a new era of EU integration to sustain growth in the face of a global economy fracturing along new lines as Donald Trump enters the White House. As the new US President prepares to press ahead with his protectionist agenda, the head of the EU executive said that the bloc could no longer rely on the approach that has sustained it in this century. Ms von der Leyen told the summit, in the last 25 years, Europe has relied on the receding tide of global trade to drive its growth. It has relied on cheap energy from Russia, and Europe has too often outsourced the security. but those days are gone. She did not mention Trump by name, but her prescription for closer collaboration appeared to be a part of a response to the new administration's nationalistic approach. She said today's world was still nearly as connected as ever, but it's also started fracturing along new lines, adding, "The cooperative world order we imagined 25 years ago has not turned into reality. Instead, we have entered a new era of harsh geostrategic competition. We need to work together to avoid a global race to the bottom." Von der Leyen said the Commission would shortly publish new proposals in 3 areas. Responding to the report it commissioned from the former European Central Bank President Mario Draghi last year about the increase in productivity and growth. She called for deeper integration of the capital markets, the dismantling of barriers in the single market so that innovative companies can operate under a single set of rules across 27 member bloc, and a new energy union to permanently end the reliance on Russian gas. Addressing the WEF Davos, Olaf Scholz, Federal Chancellor of Germany, said Putin must not win in Ukraine. Scholz said the world needs clarity and steadfastness, particularly on peace and security. We must protect the international order, he says. And the most important element of that order is the inevitability of national borders, adding, "This is why President Putin must not be successful in the war he has launched against Ukraine." Earlier, 2 Greenpeace activists unveiled a banner reading, "Tax the super rich, fund a just and green future," above the main lobby near the WEF Congress Hall, where the headline speeches take place. Linda, how realistic is a deeper EU integration in the current political climate?
Aye, how realistic indeed. Oh, well, when you consider how the UK walked away from the EU and consider how there's some distrust of the EU in some of the member states and, some of the sort of right-wing membership there is now, maybe it's not as hopeful as Ursula von der Leyen would like it to be. The other thing about Davos is it's not just politicians and folks speaking there. You do have, interesting, the Greenpeace activists call them the super rich, but you do have some major rich people there, industrialists and financiers, etc. And I thought what was interesting reading about some of the speeches they made as opposed to the speeches by public figures, that there's a mixed bag. Some of them are really worried about the effect of Trump and potential tariffs, etc. Some of them are actually looking to welcome it. They're the free marketeers who are looking more to the effect in their own pockets than they would be, to the wider European community. So that in itself is a real concern too. And when you consider Elon Musk in the US, he's obviously one of those as well. So I would like greater European integration in terms of looking after the European bloc. But it makes me angry when I think of the UK having just walked away from it and all the moans and groans you now get in the UK about that, with no recognition that the UK brought it on itself. Scotland didn't, of course. Northern Ireland didn't. However, I think that there is an opportunity for the UK here to be having deep and serious discussions with the European Union and with the Commission and with the politicians about more integration. And that would be in terms of the customs union and the single market. And I just cannot understand why a Labour UK government under Keir Starmer, who was totally opposed to Brexit, I remember his speeches, and very good they were too, but sadly they seem now to have been insincere and merely oppositionist. He's still saying that customs union and single market is out of the question for the UK. But there must be something that could be done because the European Union wants it to be looking at how we best protect the peace, apart from Putin and Ukraine, and other things out with the European Union, but a peace amongst members of the European Union. So I really think that Starmer, on behalf of the UK government, indeed on behalf of the component parts of the UK, should be having serious discussions about greater integration with Europe, even if he's not talking about going back into membership. And that's what I would like to see.
Perfect, thank you, Linda. ScotGov reforms energy performance certificates. Energy performance certificates are to be revised and updated to give consumers a clearer picture of their home's energy performance and to link better with the drive to cut emissions from homes and buildings. Changes proposed today include an introduction of new rating systems which will give clearer information on the fabric energy efficiency of a property, the emissions, the efficiency and running costs of its heating system, and the cost of energy to run a home. The EPC format will also be redesigned to make it easier to understand, and the validity of EPCs will be reduced from 10 to 5 years to ensure consumers have a more up-to-date information. Alistair Allen, acting as Minister for Climate Action, said, "Energy performance certificates are a vital source of information for home and building owners and potential purchasers. By improving the EPC, we can give everyone a clearer picture of the actual energy efficiency of a home. These improvements reflect feedback from external groups including consumer organisations and the Climate Change Committee, as well as from the industry, and are in line with changes to the EPCs being implemented elsewhere in the UK and Europe. Proposed changes include a new EPC rating system for domestic buildings which will give clearer information on the fabric energy of a property, the emissions, efficiency and running costs of its heating system, and the cost of energy to run a home to standardised conditions. A new EPC rating system for non-domestic buildings, a redesigned EPC certificate based on the first phase of new user testing, and to be followed by a section phase prior to regulations coming into force. Reduction of the validity period of the EPCs from 10 to 5 years to ensure consumers have a more up-to-date information. Development of new dynamic EPC user interface to sit alongside the published EPC. Introduction of strengthened operational governance arrangements for EPC assessors and approved organisations to enhance quality assurance for consumers. Establishing a new technical infrastructure to replace the current standard assessment procedure with the new UK Home Energy Model HEM. Calculating methodology together with a new EPC register where we will share significant parts with the UK government. What do you make of this, Linda?
Well, I think it's to be welcomed. I have to say, if I remember rightly, they're part of the home report, if someone wants to sell their home, for example. But they were complicated. I've seen a few of these myself over the years, and they're quite hard to understand and to make out. And it's always the same thing. When these things are designed by people totally in the know, they become quite complicated for those of us who haven't studied this kind of thing for years. So I think it is to be welcomed that it's going to have a better format. Really important that consumers do have a better idea of not just performance of their homes and how to cut emissions, but also about the costs. So that's important. And I noticed that the validity of them is to be cut from 10 years to 5 years. So I would hope that they will be in such a format and easy to understand that people may try to make improvements over that period with a view to getting a better rating. So that's good. I have some concern about the non-domestic stuff because there are so many non-domestic buildings in Scotland that are miles away from meeting anything like that, especially in industrial estates and places like that were built in the 60s and 70s and some even before that. That will cost an absolute fortune to bring up to speed, and of course that has to be under the realm of the local authorities to be looking at all that. But the intention of
Perfect.
that is excellent. So
Thank you,
yes, all
Linda.
in all, I would welcome hard work, and we seem to have a result, and it should be implemented as soon as possible.
Thank you. Finally, AI software tools aim to use high street eye tests to spot dementia risk. Data scientists and clinical researchers are working with high street opticians for the first time to develop a digital tool that can predict a person's risk of dementia from a routine eye test. The NUDI research team, led by the University of Edinburgh with Glasgow Caledonian University, has collected almost 1 million eye scans from opticians across Scotland, framing the world's largest data set of its kind. The scientists will then use artificial intelligence and machine learning to analyse the image data linked to the relevant patient data on demographics, treatment history and pre-existing conditions. This data is anonymised and patients can't be identified. It is anonymous and patients cannot be identified, but it allows researchers to find patterns that could indicate a person's risk of developing dementia, as well as giving a broad picture of brain health. The project is the second funded and supported by NUDI of a first-of-its-kind global collaboration between the pharmaceutical company Eisai, Gates Ventures, the University of Edinburgh, the medical research charity LifeArc, and the National Health Service Data Science Institute Health Data Research UK. Professor of Clinical Ophthalmology at the University of Edinburgh, NUDI colleague Balajean Dillon said, "The eye can tell us far more than we thought possible. The blood vessels and neural pathways of retina and brain are immediately related. But unlike the brain, we can see the retina with the simple, inexpensive equipment found in every high street in the UK." Linda, what role do you think the Scottish Government can play in supporting this integration into the high street opticians?
Well, I think I'm presuming that the Scottish Government will have been aware of this ongoing for some time. And it's fantastic. It's fascinating over the years what optometry, the sophistication of optometry has been able to identify in health issues. And this is just the latest to be really welcomed. I mean, the research team is based in Scotland because it's Edinburgh University and Glasgow Caledonian University. So the Scottish Government will be aware of what's going on. So I would hope there is collaborative working there. And, Public Health Scotland are there too. So, it would be good if they are helping to give information out to the high street opticians or optometrists or ophthalmologists, whatever they're called now, to be saying, look, this is something that can be done. And I'm in no doubt that these individual practitioners who have been in the front line of identifying other things through eye tests, routine eye tests, will be more than willing to take this on as well. So some good news to end the programme with.
Thank you, Linda. Well, that's it for us this evening at Scotland at 7. Thank you to our guest Linda for being here tonight. Before I go, I just wanted to remind you that Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. To everyone who has donated and everyone who has signed to make our monthly payment, thank you very much. We raised £20,000 from April to the end of 2024 and £16,000 short of our £36,000 target. We had to borrow £12,000 to enable us to pay our bills and survive. But the pressure is still on and we need to find enough regular donors to give us financial security. We face costs of over £4,000 every month, but only receive donations of around £2,500. We need more regular subscribers and we need to clear our debts as well. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford the £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter and please don't donate whatever you can afford. Thank you, and thank you again to Linda. Goodbye and thank you for watching.